Okay, so this is the formal welcome to this seminar on natural awakening. So to begin with, I'll recap what we talked about last time. So the Buddha in the Satipatthana Sutra taught how to cultivate awareness. There's other sutras where it's taught, but in the Satipatthana Sutta, it's where it's really given a lot of time, and there's very detailed instructions there. So I will send out by email a link to a couple of different translations of that sutra, because as you're probably aware, the sutras very change flavor quite dramatically depending on who's translated them, and the also kind of like the approach that the translator has taken. So whether that person is a Theravadan practitioner or a Mahayana practitioner or a Vajrayana practitioner or a Dzogchen or Mahamudra practitioner, the way those sutras are translated is very much colored by that perspective. So it's a good idea to have a look at a couple of them. That being said, I'm going to read the kind of core text from that sutra that's important to what we're talking about. This is a 2-hour session, sorry, for those who are asking in the chat. So we will be looking at it from 3 levels, and I'll try to kind of like simplify things so we can see that this is a unified thing, that it's not. There's actually very little difference in how the Theravada approach this, how the Mahayana approach this, and then how the Vajrayana approach this, and then how it's approached in Dzogchen. This particular thing is fairly much what I would call trans vehicle. It's beyond the vehicles. It's kind of like approached with some subtle nuances, some subtle differences, but much the same from tradition to tradition. And the reason for that is awareness is awareness. It is just what it is. You know, there's not much more. There's no way to make it something else. It is what it is. So as a little beginning, I will read you from the Satipatthana Sutra, the kind of core bit that is the root of all awareness training in all traditions. And then I'll talk about how that's been adapted across the various traditions. But again, we are going to spend much more time on talking about how it's done in the Dzogchen tradition, but also in our lineage, how this is approached, which is actually a little bit different to all of them. It's simpler, which is the hallmark of what we do. So I'll just read this. This is from the Satipatthana Sutra. This particular translation is done by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is actually quite a good translation. So the Buddha said, further, bhikshus, the practitioner observes the objects of mind in the objects of mind with regard to the 6 sense organs and the 6 sense objects. How does she observe this? She is aware of the eyes and aware of the form, which is phenomena. I'll come back to these ideas in a minute. And she is aware of the internal formations, which are feelings and thoughts. These are my words that I'm adding in, which are produced in dependence on these 2 things. She is aware of the birth of a new internal formation and is aware of abandoning an already produced internal formation. And she is aware when an already abandoned internal formation will not rise again. So in other words, when she is aware of eyes and aware of the form or phenomena, the thing that's perceived by the eye, right? When she's aware of the internal formations, that's feelings and thoughts that arise as a result of the sense information coming in. And then the last bit, She's aware when an already abandoned, when she's talking about the different stages of how the mind moves. She's aware of the birth. She's aware of abandoning. She's aware when an already abandoned thing doesn't rise again. So that's being aware of mind itself. Okay. And then finally, the Buddha says, she is aware in the same way of the ears and sound, the nose and smell, the tongue and taste, the body and touch, the mind and objects of mind. So here the Buddha is saying this practice of awareness, or what we might call vipassana, in the sutra sense, it's called vipassana. The practice proceeds through a meditation that focuses on each sense one sense at a time and goes through, right? Also, you can, if you want, but you need a very significant foundation in shamatha to do it this way. You can also be aware of all senses at once and what's happening, but you need quite a bit of spaciousness in the mind for that to be possible. So this awareness training in the Sutrayana level focuses on the body, 4 things. And these 4 things are called the 4 applications of mindfulness, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, depending on the tradition. So number 1, the body. And in the Sutrayana, we're focusing on the impermanence of the body. So you become aware of the impermanence of the body. On the Mahayana level, you're becoming aware of the empty nature of the body, right? Number 2 is feelings. On the Sutrayana level, you're aware of the feelings of suffering, how things change, and the unpleasant ways that they change, and the loss involved in change. On the Mahayana level, you're becoming aware of the empty nature of feelings and thoughts. Okay. The third foundation of mindfulness, or the third aspect of mindfulness, is the mind itself. By mind, we're talking about thinking, feeling, and sensing, not awareness. So then we're looking at, on the Sutrayana level, the impermanent nature of the mind, the fact that thoughts, feelings, and sensations rise, abide for a time, and then they vanish. They're profoundly impermanent. Everything in the mind is profoundly impermanent. And then at the Mahayana level, we're looking at the empty nature of the mind. So the fact that the mind has no owner. The actual phrase in the early sutras is ownerless. So often you see when the word anatta, or non-self, is mentioned, this word ownerless is also mentioned. Nothing in the mind is owned by anybody. We think we own what's in our mind, but we do not. They have no owner. They are triggered by external things, and external things can be the mind itself, so external to awareness, and then they just proliferate, but they're not rooted anywhere. They're rootless. They have no, in the West philosophical traditions, we might call that no ontological foundation. There's nothing underneath them, So in the West, one of the things that we always talk about has no ontological foundation is gender, But other things like identity, nationality, these things, they're constructed. They have nothing under them. Okay, so everything in the mind is like that. It is ritual, repeated, performative, has nothing under it. It's triggered completely by external factors. And that's one of those external factors, external to awareness, is the mind itself, memories, etc. Reactions can trigger more reactions, etc. So on the Sutrayana and Mahayana level, mindfulness means to be aware of what's happening in the body. So let's bring the Sutrayana and the Mahayana together here. To be aware of the impermanent and empty nature of the body, to be aware of the suffering nature of feelings, the empty nature of feelings, to be aware of the impermanent and empty nature of the mind, and then to be aware, and then the fourth one is phenomena. So phenomena is everything that exists in the mind and outside the mind. So and phenomena on the sutra level, we're focusing on the ownerless nature of phenomena. Like we don't actually own the things we perceive. Our feelings and thoughts and things about things we perceive, we don't own them. They're ownerless. And on the Mahayana level, we're focusing on the empty nature, empty of self nature, the fact that everything's empty. It's all fabricated, constructed, not abiding, not nothing has intrinsic self nature. It's a construct, a fabrication, fabricated largely by the senses and the mind. Okay, so on that level, if you want to bring Sutrayana together, we remember the impermanent and empty nature of all phenomena. Everything that rises in the mind, but also everything that's perceived, everything that's supposedly out there. Okay, so that's those two levels, what we do. And the Buddha taught to go through this process of looking at something and going through and becoming again, this is why we need such a strong foundation in shamatha, because this cannot be done without shamatha, calm abiding. You know, I'm always talking about the point of calm abiding is the calm. It's really, really important that we get that. The point of calm abiding is the calm, but that calm, it brings spaciousness, and that spaciousness makes everything that rises in the mind more lucid. We more clearly see things as they arise, as they abide, and as they depart, right? You can't have vipassana without shamatha. They cannot be done together, which is why I often find it strange that vipassana is taught separately to shamatha in some traditions and taught without shamatha. So there's not like a requirement to have shamatha first and then do vipassana. Actually, vipassana cannot work without shamatha. What you'll get is hypervigilance if you practice vipassana without shamatha. And hypervigilance is not a healthy thing, you know, and it actually concretizes our perceptions sometimes. That being said, you can teach vipassana and embed in it this idea that you relax, don't be troubled, let go of what's happening, just be aware, don't have emotional reactions. You can teach it in that way, but in my humble opinion, you really need a foundation of shamatha first for everything else in the Dharma. The calm's essential, the spaciousness in the mind is essential, the lucidity and luminous clarity that shamatha brings is absolutely essential. Sorry, some people are getting bumped out and I'm having to let them back in. Okay, so just to reiterate, shamatha is essential as a foundation. In Vipassana, we move through this process of looking at or being aware of the body, the impermanent and empty nature of it, feelings, the impermanent and empty nature of feelings, the mind, the impermanent and empty nature of the mind, and all phenomena, the impermanent and empty nature of phenomena. It's pretty simple, you know, and the Buddha taught we go through that how? Through the senses. Why? Because that information is already happening. That's already going on. So you might as well make use of what's already going on in order to connect with the impermanent and empty nature of things. So the Buddha didn't say you need to, with the body, go through the senses, eyes, taste, sound, etc., and then go on to feelings and just be aware of the feelings, blah, blah. You can be aware of feelings through the senses because they evoke feelings. And by feelings, it's meant thoughts and feelings, emotions. So you can be aware of what rises in the mind through being aware of what the senses are doing, how the senses work. Likewise, you can be aware of everything through being aware of the mind. You're aware. So when you're aware of what's happening in the mind, you're aware of phenomena. So these things, you don't have to do it sort of like one at a time. There are traditions where they do that. They go through one at a time. They have different meditations for each level, but it is not essential. You don't need to do that. To go through the senses is to connect with all four at once, which is why the Buddha taught that in the Satipatthana Sutra. Okay, now, if you want, so this is the thing. In the Dharma, there are 84,000 methods. We don't need to become accomplished at all of them. We only need to become accomplished at one. And because each method's equal, each method leads to full and complete awakening. Now, so you don't need to go, I'm going to do the sutra level thing, then I'm going to, which is focus mostly on impermanence and the ownerless nature of things. Then I'm going to do the Mahayana thing, and I'm going to focus on the empty nature of things. Then I'm going to do the Vajrayana thing. We haven't really talked about the Vajrayana thing, but the Vajrayana thing is to go through the body and see its perfect nature, empty and perfect nature. Go through feelings, thoughts, and sensations and see the empty and perfect nature of them. Why are they perfect? Because they're empty. Like, really, that word perfect is in Dharma, it means empty. Perfect because of emptiness. It can be no other way, so it's perfect. And then the empty and perfect nature of the mind, and then the empty and perfect nature of phenomena, especially external phenomena, but also, one's own mind, one's own nature. So Vajrayana it transforms our perception of things as imperfect into a perception of things as perfect. Why? Because that leads to contentment, and then in a state of contentment, the true nature of mind rises. There are other reasons. The focus on empty and perfect is important. You can't have just the focus on the perfect, because that leads to a solidification of the sense of the self, which is a trap. So all of these ways of doing things lead to a letting go of our grasping on them, on things that we experience, the body, our grasping on our body, grasping on feelings and emotions and thoughts, grasping on the mind itself, which is what we think is us, and grasping on phenomena, So each level, it does the same thing. It untangles our grasping. And the Vajrayana as well, it untangles our grasping on things because it equalizes things. These things are all perfect and pure and empty. So, but if you don't have the empty side of that, then it's essentially a narcissistic, hedonistic game. So the emptiness is important. And then in Dzogchen, they take this idea of using the senses to cultivate awareness and to release and relax. When we talk about grasping, a really good exercise is to get our fists and ball them up and ball up the whole body, and then let it go. And what do you feel? You feel relief and you feel relaxed. To grasp is unpleasant. It's a state of suffering. To let go is relief and contentment, and it's a very pleasant feeling. So when we say to let go, we mean to cease to grasp, and to be in a state of contentment and okayness with everything. Now, in Dzogchen, they combine this thread of awareness training from the sutra and the thread of awareness training from the Mahayana. So the sutra focuses on impermanence and suffering, and the Mahayana focuses on emptiness, right? And the luminous nature of things. So in Dzogchen, they take those two things and the idea of going through the senses, and they then look at the elements one at a time. So what we would call Kode Rushen or outer Rushen is, now again, I am giving you an overview. I am not teaching this, Kode Rushen. It's not something we do in our lineage. It's not essential, not required. what we do is an equivalent thing, which is called natural awakening, which is actually older. What we call Kore Rushen. It is, we don't see it in the Dzogchen literature until, I'm not exactly sure, but 1400s, probably 13 more, 1200s maybe. What we call natural awakening is much older. There's a cycle of Dzogchen teachings called the Ötzil Ningpo, the luminous heart essence, which is quite old. So going back to like 900s. And the natural awakening practices are like what's found there. You know, later things start to get more tantric. I've talked about this a lot, particularly funerary practices and all that sort of stuff starts to creep in to Dzogchen, and then you get some lineages. There's basically 7 traditions of Dzogchen minimum. There's probably a lot more, and some of those are very tantric. They embrace tantra, but the early original Dzogchen tradition rejects tantra completely, like in like absolute terms, utterly rejects it. So you can kind of tell how old a practice is, or where it fits in the history of the unfolding of these things, by how tantric it is, what tantric elements it includes or excludes. So Kore Rushen, or what we call outer Rushen, that phrase means to discriminate between what is real and what is false, to differentiate between samsara and nirvana. That's all that phrase means. And that's awareness, to be aware of the fabricated and the unfabricated, to be aware of the unborn, undying, and to be aware of the born and the dying, you know? So that's all Kore Rushen is meant to do. And it has outer, inner, and secret. Outer is this kind of process where you go through the senses. So and almost always Kore Rushen is done in solitude and in nature. That is an interesting legacy of the original luminous heart essence teachings, which is the earlier transmission of Dzogchen straight from Odhyana, you know, where it's always done in nature, you know, always. And that's why it's called natural awakening in our particular tradition. So then outer Rushen is, you go same process, use the senses, so the eye, and so you look at something that represents one of the elements. So for earth, you choose a mountain usually. So you sit, you look at a mountain, and because you've already got a foundation of shamatha, see, it's essential. When you sit and look at a mountain, there's space between what is being perceived a formal phenomena, how that information is coming in, and then what the mind constructs with it. That space, and it's only really what you only really need 7 seconds of space. I mean, that seems like an interminably long time in terms of perception, because perception is bang, 1/64th of a second. It's just constant. That's the trap we're in. So you need some seconds of space which is produced by calm, relaxation, letting go, which arises through sitting meditation, silent sitting. So you look at a mountain, and then you become quite aware of the gap between that which is perceived, the perception itself, and what that perception creates in the mind. Those things become very clear in that process. And so then you can separate awareness itself from the perception. What's the perceptual process? The whole perceptual process itself is of the dualistic mind. It's not of awareness. Awareness knows without that process. Awareness knows everything without that process. That process is unnecessary. How do we know this? You can't know it. You have to directly experience it. But for those who have had near-death experiences or have done certain practices, there is okay, how do I say this without sounding strange? When we die, our senses cease. And yet, if you have had a near-death experience or you have done certain practices, you are acutely aware that when the senses cease, right, awareness is still there, vivid and luminous and unchanged. That's key. Unchanged by death. Completely unchanged. That's what we call Tathagatagarbha, Sugatagarbha, Buddha nature, Rigpa. That awareness is unchanged. So the perceptual process is separate to that, but arises within that. Like it's embraced by that, completely enfolded within that. So we don't need to see that process as something to be problematic, because what is it? Empty, yay, empty. So there's no problem. Arises within emptiness, or Rigpa, or the true nature of mind, or whatever you want to call it, abides there, vanishes from there. Okay, so or dissolves back into that. So that's why we don't really need to worry about it, anything that happens. So then that's the earth element, right? We've looked at a mountain, and the language in the Tantra and in the more tantric versions of Kode Rushen, they'll use seed syllables, even maybe enunciated, so chanted. So that makes it a mantra. And they might even do a little visualization. And oftentimes, the really interesting thing about this is as the more kind of like the more Tantra has colonized Dzogchen, the more kind of ritual is around it. So you'll see, for instance, in Dark Retreat, you see traditions where there's this whole sadhana that is done before a session of meditation inside Dark Retreat. But in the original Luminous Heart Essence tradition, there's no sadhanas needed to be done. That's not required. In fact, it's Gaurav George says quite clearly, don't do that. It's dualistic. So it's really kind of interesting. You can really sort of tell where in the process of Tantra colonizing Dzogchen these practices sit. The more elaborate they get, the more colonized they are. So then if you wanted to do, say, sound, you would sit. The traditional one in Tibet was you would sit by a river, or particularly a waterfall is considered good because it produces enough sound, you know. So you would sit by a river, particularly if there's like a babbling brook kind of thing, or a waterfall was very popular. And you see paintings of these yogis sitting before waterfalls, and that's what they're doing. They're doing this luminous heart essence version of Rushen, Kode Rushen. It wouldn't even been called Kode Rushen then. It would have just been called luminous heart essence or Dzogchen practice or something. You know, it might not have even had a name. They might have just simply called it awareness. You know, we don't know. So they sit by a river or a waterfall, and they place their awareness very gently on the sound. And they're just aware of the sound. It's really very simple. And because you already have some space in the mind created by calm abiding, shamatha meditation, then you become, as you sit with your awareness on the sound, you become very clearly aware of that which is fabricated, right? The sound. That which is not fabricated, your awareness of the sound. And of course, included in the fabrications are your reaction to the sound. And that includes everything physiological that happens in reaction to the sound. You know, we go, oh, lovely. There's an emotional sensation. There's emotions and sensations and feelings that arise around these things. And we become aware. That's fabricated. That's not, you know. And then we would move on to another element. So with the sky, traditionally I'll do the sky last, actually. So then with touch, tactile sensations, we would sit in the sun or in the shade, depending on, which sensation we prefer, and just feel how the sun feels on the skin, or also it could be sitting with a breeze, how the breeze feels on the skin. So you focus on that point of contact rather than the ear or whatever, and just be with that. And then you become aware of that which is fabricated and that which is not, And then likewise with taste, taste is a tricky one because you can't kind of like have a long experience of taste. It's quite quick, permanent, impermanent. But they used to do things like they would have a little, I can't remember the name of it, but a little leaf that has like quite a strong taste, and it has quite a lingering taste. So they put that there, and they would just place their awareness on that and let it be. Like here, you could probably use a lozenge of some kind, pop a lozenge in, just be aware of the taste. Again, in time, you become aware of the thing that's being perceived, the perception itself, and one's awareness as being quite distinct, right? Then if you want to do space, and this is why I left this kind of, have I done everything? So, touch with feeling sun, earth is, yeah. So earth, water, and with the wind, you would sit in a place where you could hear wind and or feel wind, and just be with the wind. So that's how you do that. And then space is the sky. So you look into the sky and just be aware of space. So that's kind of like how they work through and out of Rushan, the elements using the senses. So, but again, and they do proceed through each element in turn. So it's quite structured in that way. You do this element and then that element and this element and that element. So taste is something that's more connected to the earlier traditions. So, but we've got, and also with fire, obviously you can do that either in the sun or by a fire or however you want to feel warmth, and you become aware of how the warmth itself is produced, fabricated, constructed by the mind, and how you're aware of it and the awareness itself, and how this. So eventually, you get to the point where in each one, so earth, air, water, fire, space, you get to the point where the separation between what is fabricated and what is unfabricated dissolves. So this is an interesting thing. And so you might wonder, well, why do it? If you're just going to get to this place where why become aware of the separation or the difference, if you're just going to get to a place where the difference dissolves? Because you can't get to the place where the difference dissolves without first becoming aware of the fabricated nature of some things and the unfabricated nature of awareness. You can't get there. So there's a point where you become complete in your meditation, you can become completely one. Awareness becomes completely one with that which is being perceived and the process of perception. So the duality drops, and it actually happens. And you need to follow your kind of leanings here. If you follow your leanings, like what you like, what you prefer, then because that combines joy with it, then you get there quicker. You get to the point where the separation between that which is being perceived, the perceptual process, and one's awareness, just that division just vanishes, and one's in the state of non-dual awareness, in which you kind of understand that nothing arises, nothing moves, nothing comes or goes. Time vanishes as well. Time's an aspect of that perceptual process. So that's Kore Rushin. Now then there are other aspects of Kore Rushin which have evolved later, which move away from the elements, and that's usually called Inner Rushin or Secret Rushin, depending on the tradition. And those rely on following one's impulses. So we've got in the original idea of like awareness training is, body, feelings, mind, phenomena. So the Kodo Ryushin practices do the same thing. So so they're sort of separating that which is natural or unfabricated in the mind and in our actions, and that which is unborn in the mind. They let the impulses of the mind run and the impulses of the body run. So whatever your impulses are, you let them run and you act on them. So that's why it's done in solitude. So you can't do anything that people can't see you and go, oh, my lunatic. Because a lot of it, if you actually sit and look at what your impulses actually are, they can be pretty wild. So so that is usually called inner or secret Ryushin. And it's meant to be done in total solitude, far away, in not just in solitude, but in distinct isolation, in isolated places. So you cannot be seen or heard. A Lama who I won't name because I don't want to create any kind of like negative feeling about this Lama, because this Lama is a Buddha. When this person practiced Ryushin, and this person didn't need to practice this, they did it because they might need to teach it. So they were well beyond this practice when they did it, but it was just doing it in order to teach it. So this person used to run around the monastery naked, and became quite well known for running around the monastery naked. And people used to go, oh, that crazy old person running around naked, but other things too, not just running around naked. And I suppose in that setting, because Tibet had long been conquered, in India, in northern India, there's not a lot of space, or people think, oh, isolated North India, but actually it's very crowded, and particularly where the monasteries and retreat centers are, they're all very crowded. There's no such thing as a quiet Indian monastery. Noisy places. There's a Hindu celebration or ceremony for a particular deity almost every day that involves horns, drums, dancing, chanting, clapping. That happens every day, so it's not quiet. Anyway, so he used to run around naked as part of his Ryushin training, which he didn't need, but he was doing it because he was a lineage holder, and lineage holders have the responsibility to teach these things. So he needed to know how it worked and what happened and how it happened. So yeah, but we don't kind of like repeat. I don't ever say his name because he is actually a Buddha. And I think people might think less of him if they knew he ran around naked. I don't. He's a part of Ryushin. Anyway, so that's it. Oh, and the other thing about this is in inner Ryushin, where you let the mind run and you let your actions run, you do it to exhaustion. And that's actually kind of like the main point of it, so that you can see, oh my goodness, look what is here in the mind. What lunacy is here, what it wants to do. You see it all play out. Jamie's saying she thinks more of the Lama now that she knows that they ran around naked. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So you let it run to exhaustion, to actual collapse, right? Why? Why do you let this run to exhaustion and absolute collapse? Because only in absolute collapse, total physical exhaustion, physical, mental exhaustion, can you let go in the way that we let go in death. Like you literally have to let go when you're in that state of complete and total exhaustion, complete collapse. You have to let go, and the nature of the mind shines through, So it's very interesting process. Now, the thing about this tantric approach is that it does this. Well, you have to do outer, and then you have to do inner, and then you have to do secret, And the problem with that is that you never get to fruit in any of the stages until you get to the end, and nothing in Ryushin is seen as an end. It's seen as all seen as building a capacity for awareness before one does Trekchö and before one does Togyo. So in this mindset, there's no fruit until Togyo or Trekchö often can happen. And I think I think even very traditional, very kind of, you must do 900,000 repetitions of Nunjo and you must blah, blah, blah. That kind of lama would admit Trekchö can free you, right? But what they wouldn't admit is that shamatha, if fueled with compassion and devotion, can free you. Vipassana, this sort of practice of being aware, can free you if fueled by love and devotion. Likewise, if you do these Rushen practices with the elements, can free you if fueled by love and devotion, and if you don't move on from them. This moving on in this ladder-like process is a profound problem, you know. And why do we do it? Why do we do it? Because we don't want to be free. We want to be scholars of Buddhism. We want to be accomplished practitioners. Some of us might want to be teachers, whatever. Some of us, I mean, that's a poison chalice if ever there was one. Some of us want to be great, you know, in this religious context, you know, but we don't actually, so all of those are poison. We should only want to be free. That's it. And none of this ladder-like approach has that as its emphasis. Or they say, oh, you can't be free unless you do all this, you know. But the Buddha never taught all this. And therefore you're saying that all of the people the Buddha taught, the ones who achieved arhatship, and oftentimes like people go, oh, arhatship, it's not full Buddhahood, but essentially it's the same. It 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 transmutes or transforms into Buddhahood at the moment of dying. So it's a very xenophobic, sectarian way to view the other traditions, to see that they're not enough. It's not true. They're enough. So when you complete Kore Rushen, and there's, you know, of course, there are rules. You need to do either, I think, you know, even lamas who are very, very relaxed will say you need to do this for, you know, you need to do a retreat of at least this period of time for the outer, at least this period of time for the inner, at least this period of time for the secret, and you need to, you know, connect with the teacher, your retreat master, and make sure that it's worked, you know. So, and the amounts of time that you're meant to do those retreats are fairly substantial, but not impossible if that's how you want to go. But that being said, the Luminous Heart Essence tradition, and which is not exactly what we're doing here in Pristine Awareness, but very similar. What we're doing is like, you know, it's the practices are the same, but without the kind of like restrictions that actually have no real value, the restrictions. So that being said, it won't work without a grounding in shamatha. It just won't. So that's not like a restriction. That's like a reality, you know. Interestingly, what I've noticed with a Kempo friend of mine, Ken Chen, actually, he's a great Kempo. He's a lovely person. He teaches a Shedra, like 9 years of scholarly and practice tradition in the Nyingma tradition. He's the head Kempo for a big Shedra, and he doesn't require his students to meditate in silence, to do silent sitting. And I asked why, and he said, oh, they won't do it. And I said, but if they don't do it, none of what is built on that will work. And he said, we're hoping for blessing. We hope that blessings will make up the difference. And I am a huge believer in the potency of devotion, but you know, you you can't really rely on that. That you would be open to that, you know, after all that study and all that all those rules, you know. So something that Chogyal Namkha Norbu said, which I don't often repeat publicly, but I will repeat now. I mean, he said it publicly, but it can be misunderstood. He said that Trekche, which is the sort of like first kind of like proper Dzogchen stream, is nothing more than total relaxation. And he actually used to translate. It's interesting because Karma Rinpoche also translated it in this way, but I don't think he got it from CNN, from Chogyal Namkha Norbu. I think he came to that place separately. He translates the word Trekche as total relaxation, not cutting through, which is how you see it translated mostly. Because he translates it according to what the practice is, not the poetic name for it, you know. So he said all of Dzogchen, in fact, can be summed up with total relaxation into the natural state, you know. Now, we can't relax. It is unnatural to us to relax. So even if we think we're relaxing, you know, whether we're watching TV or going for a walk or whatever, the mind is still doing a whole lot of stuff. We're still tethered to past, present, and future. We're still thinking about the past and still anticipating the future. To totally relax, you need to be outside of that. So the natural awakening process uses this idea of using the senses to ground awareness in a natural object with relaxation so that it becomes a practice in and of itself. So you could just do this. And this is the thing. A lot of lamas, they have one thing that they do. You know, the ones who are really great, they have one thing that they do, you know, because it's their hard practice and that's what they do. And that's what gets them where they need to go, where they need to be. So we might break for a few minutes at this point because we're at the halfway point. And then, so just have some water and yeah. Jamie's saying about Malcolm Smith. Malcolm Smith is actually a really great translator. I really quite like the way Malcolm translates stuff. That he translated as a cutting through, as in cutting a string that's too tight. So this is about the middle way again. You know, like, those of you kind of my Facebook friends will know that I shared something recently about Sujata, the milkmaid who made the offering of rice pudding. Oh, I love rice pudding to, to the Buddha, and that offering enabled him to find the middle way. So, and she made that offering, his senses returned to him. So he was so starved and fatigued that his senses were dulled. So when he ate the rice pudding, and you know, rice pudding is just so full of sugar, it's delicious. His senses returned, you know, and then he heard on a boat in the river, not the Ganges, it's the river that's near Bodh I can't remember the name of it, but it's quite a broad but shallow river. He heard a boat going down the river, and on the boat was a master lute player, I think, lute, or whatever the Indian version of that is, and the student. And the master said, when you're tuning your instrument, it can't be too tight because the sound will not be right, and it can't be too, and the string will break, and it can't be too loose because then the sound just will not be there. There'll be no resonance. And so in that moment of like, apologies, the Buddha realized, oh, you know, and this is not and this seems quite, we know this because we've we've heard this so many times, but before the Buddha, this idea applied to spiritual practice was not applied. So the idea that you need to be moderate, and relaxed and gentle, this comes from the Buddha. So he discovered the middle way as a result of Sujata's offering. So likewise with everything, to be relaxed and gentle and moderate is the heart of Dzogchen, and the heart of all of the lineages or traditions that point towards or support you towards recognition of your own nature. Doga Khyentse used to say, you can't recognize the true nature of mind through force or effort. You have to relax. In the same way that you can't tame a wild horse by beating it. You actually have to be gentle and loving, So approach it gently, quietly, calmly, show love and affection. That's the way to tame a horse. So this idea of moving through level after level after level of practice, all of it very effortful and arduous to get to the point at Trekche where you just relax is, apply some logic. Is that logical? It's not logical. And of course, the reason they throw around for having to do all this is to purify negative karma. But in the Dzogchen tradition, there's a very clear teachings around the idea that one's own nature is beyond karma and can't be affected by it. And so to go directly there, it doesn't mean that there's no karma or karma doesn't exist or whatever. It just means to go directly to that means that you'll be liberated from your karma. You don't need to purify it. It's a very different approach. This idea of purifying karma takes eons, and all the texts tell us it takes eons to purify all that karma. But the Dzogchen texts state quite clearly, if you go straight to your true nature, all that karma is liberated, not purified, in its own place, and you're free, And it doesn't take eons, it takes one lifetime maximum. So in the Tantras, they say it takes 7 lifetimes, generally speaking, to become liberated. In the Mahayana and Sutrayana, they say it takes eons, In Dzogchen, they say, look, if you go straight to the heart of things, straight to your own nature, it will be 1 lifetime maximum. And I don't understand why we would not take that course. It makes no sense to me at all. So, and lots of Dzogchen masters will point out, Tantra takes a lifetime minimum just to learn the basics, just to learn how to do all of the things, torma making and satsa making and banging the drum and blowing the horn and ringing, clanging the cymbals, and this takes a lifetime to learn all this stuff. For each particular sadhana, different ways to play the drum, different ways to play the cymbals, different ways to play the horn, different tormas to make, different mandalas to build. This takes a lifetime just to get the basics done. So, I think, who was it said that? Tukun Namdak. He's a Bempo master. So who has time for that? We don't have time for that, So we'll take a break, and then when we come back, we'll focus in on the natural awakening process that we use in this lineage, which is parallel to awareness training in other traditions, but it's simpler, and it's more like the original version taught in the Luminous Heart Essence. It could be precisely the same, but a lot of the Luminous Heart Essence texts that come from like the 800s, they have not been translated into English. And so I only have a sense of like them from what I've been told. Haven't been able to read them. So, I mean, I can kind of get an understanding by looking at the Tibetan, but I don't read or speak Tibetan fluently. I have a vocabulary, quite a large vocabulary of Tibetan words, so I can kind of see, oh, that's what this is about. But some has been translated in English, which I have seen, but most of it has not. So I can't say for sure that this is completely different. It might be exactly the same, but I think it's a little bit different, just in terms of foregrounding joy and relaxation, like explicitly foregrounding those things. All right, let's take a break of 5 minutes, and then we shall return. Okay, so we're back from our break. So before we continue talking about the natural awakening process that we do in Pristine Awareness Sangha, I'm just going to, which is a condensed and I think very potent version of what other traditions would call, like in the Sutrayana, it would be called close mindfulness. In Mahayana, it would be called just mindfulness. In the Dzogchen tradition, it probably called Kore Rushen. But the way we do it, it's not in a hierarchy of other things. It can be done just as it's by itself, as its own thing, and it's complete. All right, now I'm just going to answer some questions before we move on. I don't think there's many in the chat, but there is a couple of important ones. So Robin has asked, why do teachers who are realized teach purification practices? And she's saying that really confuses her because she doesn't understand why they would teach it as the path. Now, I get asked this all the time. And the reason is, there's two reasons. The first reason is we teach what we are given to teach, and we teach what is in our lineage. Okay, so when Jamyang and I were given permission to teach in 2006, that was the first. Oh, actually, no, I think I'd been given permission to teach earlier than that. But that particular permission, we were given from Karma Rinpoche, we were given a list of things that would be good to teach. And on that list was Introduction to the Nature of Mind and anything that leads to that point, which is kind of everything. It's kind of like everything. So in our tradition, and Jamyang has been encouraged to teach by his Lama and also Karma Rinpoche and others. So although Jamyang's in retreat, so doesn't really teach, and I am the mouthpiece at the moment while he's in retreat. So we teach what we're given to teach. So we can't, for example, I have not done, let me think of something that I haven't done. I can't think of anything. Okay, so there's a terma in the Drukpa Kagyu tradition that is very important to the Drukpa Kagyu tradition. Can't remember the name of it. And I have not done that, right? Because I was never given it. And even though it's really important in the Kampagar Drukpa Kagyu tradition, Jamyang was never given it. When we asked Togden Amtran about it, Togden Amtran said, no, don't worry about that. Just do what you're doing, which is this stuff, more formless, relaxed sort of thing. So that practice we never received, and so we cannot teach it. Very simple. Never received it, can't teach it. So the Dzogchen teachings are a lineage. They have come down in a progression, and they are not held. The lineage is not held by the Gelugpa tradition. They don't have it. Also, many of the Kagyu schools don't have it, although the Drukpa Kagyu and the Drikung Kagyu do have the Dzogchen lineages, particularly the Drukpa Kampaga. They're very strong in the Dzogchen lineages. And the Sakya tradition mostly don't have Dzogchen. However, the current, I'm not sure if you guys know this, but the current, not the current, the previous Sakya Traichen, who is a Buddha, he is the reincarnation of a Dujom Turton. So, surprise. So they have that lineage there in what we call the bone lineage. So, and also his granddaughter, whose name evades me, her title is Jetsama already, and she's like 9. She's an incarnation of Tare Lama, a female Dujom Turton. So you'll see that because of that, because of who the previous Sakya Traichen was and who his granddaughter is, they're Dujom incarnate lamas, that will become a strong thread in the Sakya tradition, you know. And it's interesting that when I first met Holiness Sakya Traichen, I didn't know that. I had no idea that he was an incarnation of Dujom Tulku. But I felt profound devotion immediately on the spot and adored him straight away. So, you know, these connections, they show up, you know, without us knowing. Anyway, so you can't teach what you haven't been taught. And the Gelugpa tradition doesn't have the self-liberation teachings. So they have the purification teachings and the transformation teachings. That's what Vajrayana is, a combination of the purification teachings, the renunciation, purification, and transformation teachings, Sutra, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. That's what they have. So that's what they teach. They can't teach what they don't have. It's very simple. So on the Sutrayana level, we deal with karma, right? Through renunciation, not purification. Through renunciation. That's what the Buddha taught, renunciation. How does it work? It takes time, but it works by renunciation means you don't create any more negative karma. No more. If you are truly renounced, no more negative karma comes. Follow the 5 precepts. No more negative karma comes. Number 2, in renunciation, right, which you've done for the sake of sentient beings and your own liberation, positive karma is accumulated. So that's how it works on that level, renunciation. In the Mahayana, it's purification, right? This starts more than 1,000 years after the Buddha's passed away. So the purification idea is that you do practices to purify your negative karma and you adopt attitudes, which can be summarized in the 6 parameters, as you adopt attitudes that produce positive karma, right? And also start to dissolve negative karma. So that's how it works on the purification level. On the transformation level, you look into the empty nature, this is Vajrayana, you look into the empty nature of the negative emotion, right? And you transform it into its true nature, right? So you look into, so in the Vajrayana, there's a mix of applying an antidote, which is Mahayana, you know, which is stopping the negative thing and doing a positive thing, similar to the renunciation process. But also in Vajrayana is that you look into the nature of the thing and see its perfect nature. So anger in its perfect nature is discerning wisdom or something. Like they have these correlations, that there is a wisdom behind every negative emotion. You know, there's the 5 Buddha families, the 5 wisdoms, the 5 impurities or poisons, right? So you transform the impurity into its true nature, its wisdom nature, through visualization and mantra. Essentially, that's how that works. Now, the self-liberating teachings, which come from the Dzogchen tradition, which have in Buddhism, their root in 650 BC with Garab Dorji, they teach not to abandon renunciation, no. Not to abandon the cultivation of positive qualities or virtues, no, you just do that. But you don't do the purification because it takes too long. You do the self-liberation of everything that's in the mind and including what's in the what they call alaya vijnana, or the storehouse. I don't like this translation, but the storehouse consciousness, the base where the karma is, right? Well, there's the absolute ground, which is totally free of karma, which is your true nature, your natural awareness. And then above that is this alaya vijnana, which carries the karma, also carries kind of like imprints from previous lives. Anyway, that's a bit complicated. But so in the Dzogchen tradition, you go straight to the ground. And in the ground, everything's self-liberated. It doesn't adhere to or pertain to the ground. It can't. So, and this is a philosophical difference also, because in some of the Tibetan lineages, they see it's, I won't go into the Tibetan, I won't use the Tibetan words because it's confusing, but there's a different view of emptiness. So there's the view of emptiness held by the Nyingma, Kagyu, and Sakya is different to the view of emptiness held by the Gelugpa. So in the Nyingma, we have lineages that hold both views simultaneously, and we think that they're both okay. Same in the Sakya, same in the Kagyu. And then there's the Jonang, which has only the opposite view to the Gelugpas. So anyway, this view of emptiness impacts how we view the Buddha nature. So the view of emptiness is that the Buddha nature is empty of all negative stains. And if you have that view, the self-liberation process works, if that makes sense. Anyway, yeah, that's good. I like what Jamie's done there in their little, sorry, summary. Okay, so essentially, they don't teach it because they don't have it, but there's also a difference in view of emptiness. And the view of emptiness that comes from Tsongkhapa in the Gelugpa school, interestingly, was refuted by his immediate closest student or disciple as wrong. But Tsongkhapa had enough disciples that willing to go with his view that initial rejection by his closest first disciple was overlooked, you know. So but it's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's a different view, you know. It's just a different view. In the Nyingma, we're able to have both those views simultaneously, and they're not contradictory. But the Gelugpa don't feel that way. They feel that you can only have that one view. The other view is a challenge to them. So that's why this constant kind of like conflict has been going on for time, immemorial, really. Okay, sorry, Jamie. I try to do the they them when I remember, but my tendency is to go with she pronouns for everyone, which is a thing which is I think unique to how I grew up in clubs in the 80s. We just all used she. It was a sort of a unique thing for that time. Anyway, so that's it, Robin. They can't teach what they don't have. We can't teach what we don't have. And there's this slight difference in view of emptiness. In the Nyingma, we're happy with both views. They're both okay. But in the Gelugpa, they insist that you must hold this one particular view, you know, which is why there's tension there. Not on our side, I don't think there's tension there, but on some sides, there's tension there. Anyway, that's the reason. Okay. Sorry, Jamie's cracking me up. Okay, so let's move on. Natural awakening. Now, the thing with this is you choose the sense faculty and the element, the natural element, and the environment that you prefer. Okay, so it's not like you process through them all. You choose the sense faculty, the environment, and the element that you prefer. It's your choice. No one can choose it for you. That being said, you can So, for example, I'm a wind person. I am very emotionally and blissfully connected to it. So I have often used the wind as my awareness training practice. So sit in the wind, stand in the wind, and just feel it, and have my awareness on it, on its sound, but also its feeling. So in the natural awakening process, you don't close down any of the senses. You leave them all open. So you might be feeling on your skin the wind. That might be the main way you choose to connect with it. But you're also aware of the sound. You're also aware of the changes in temperature, so the heat, the fire element. You're also aware of the space in the wind. So you're aware of all of the elements at the same time as you connect with the one that is your favorite, and with the sense that is your favorite. So even though, we almost always sit with our eyes open, unless that is a problem for you and you don't want to, you can sit with your eyes closed, it's fine. But because our eyes are open, we might see the rustling of grass or a bush or something in our gaze that we're not focused on, but it's just generally there. We might see the movement of the wind, feel it on our skin, have a sense of the space of it, and hear the sound. So it's like a total experience. Our awareness is gently resting on the total experience of the wind, and also, of course, because we're sitting on the ground, so there's an earth element beneath, and there's the sky above, so there's space as well there. So it's like natural awakening process is very simple, but it also is all sense faculties open, but relaxed. You're not trying to put one experience over the other, but you will find that you naturally do. You naturally are more the sound or the feeling or the smell, So, for example, here in Australia, something you notice when you come back to Australia after having been overseas is the smell. So it's very subtle and you don't get it. If you live in a city in particular, might not pick it up. But I went into a 3-month retreat in Japan in I'm thinking 99, 2000, somewhere around there. And when I came back, I got off the plane, hopped in a taxi, got dropped off at my home, and when I got out of the taxi, I was just struck by how, because when I was in that retreat, I was kind of like focused on kind of like sitting with nature. Anyway, so when I got back, I was like struck like really acutely with the smell. Australian air is just perfused with eucalyptus, and while we're here, we don't notice it. And if we live in a city, it might be covered up by like, exhaust fumes and smoke and perfume and people's deodorant and all this sort of other stuff. But when I came home to because I didn't live in a sort of built up area, it was really kind of profound how the smell was so kind of like distinctive. This place has a very distinctive smell. It's eucalyptus. So unless it's wattle season, and then that overpowers everything. So it's really interesting that you can be, sitting on the wind, sitting with your awareness on the wind, and then these smells will come, So you'll smell the grass, or you'll smell eucalyptus, or you'll smell whatever else is growing around, or someone's, cooking something, hopefully dal, and you smell that, and like it's really kind of interesting how this practice, our openness to all of the senses, means that you get all of it at once, and it's very relaxing. It's profoundly relaxing. So you choose the thing, the sense, and the element that is your passion or what you're interested in, and then you simply sit in the same posture as Shamatha, which is a 7-point posture of Vajrayana. But in this Sangha, we also abide by Guru Rinpoche's first principle about physical posture. Whatever posture feels best is best. So don't try to force yourself into any posture. if it's uncomfortable, if it causes pain, if it just unsettles you, if you feel unbalanced in any way, don't force yourself into any particular posture, because the thing about this whole tradition is you need to be comfortable in order to relax, in order to give rise to joy, love, compassion, evenness, and be able to recognize one's nature. You know, the relaxation, the comfort is really important. Now, that being said, your spine needs to be more or less straight, more or less. Okay. So, so for me, I've often chosen the wind, and I've just sat, eyes open in that posture, awareness on the wind, how it's connecting with me on multiple levels, multiple senses, multiple elements. You know, it changes your temperature, which means the fire element's engaged. So you just gently, but you're not analyzing that. You're just aware. And all the subtle sort of changes become more and more lucid and clear as you do this practice. And then if you have a foundation of shamatha, the space between the perceptual experience, so the contact, and then what rises in the mind in response is significant. You can see the difference between the two things. The difference between the skin on the wind on your skin and the mind's creating something about that contact, you know, and then the thoughts and feelings and things that rise after that perception has been created, that perceptual, you know, there are all these words in Dharma that I think are actually quite unhelpful because they're very complicated terms. But, you know, it's a mental factor. The wind on the skin, we don't directly experience. The brain produces a mental factor of the experience. And then that is the foundation on which our reactions arise, our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings. You know, so the sensation is part of the mental factor. It's not happening here at all, although the brain and the body are one, you know. So it's a fabrication. The sensation's a fabrication, and that becomes quite clear. And then what rises in response to the fabrication is quite clear. You know, if you sit in awareness and you've got a ground of shamatha on which you're beginning, it's very, very clear. And then in time, and especially if you have devotion or joy, one or the other, you, how am I put this? You become one with the levels, with the experience, right, which is the mental factor, the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that rise from that experience, and the phenomena itself, the thing you're feeling. You become one. That all becomes one within awareness. So that moment is profoundly transformative, because that's the true nature of all. And to have a glimpse of that means what? There's no future negative rebirth. That's kind of exciting. There is no, I'm just repeating for the sake of emphasis, there is no future negative rebirth. Cannot be. Why? Because if you experience that true nature of mind and all, then when we die and the senses all collapse or dissolve is the term used, you know, the senses all dissolve, the elements all dissolve, everything all kind of dissolves, then what's left is awareness, or rigpa, or in the Bardo teachings, there's all these words, you know, but it's very, very unhelpful. You know, it'd be good if we could just use one word for the same thing as it appears in different teachings, but of course we don't. So in the Mahayana teachings, we call it Buddha nature. In the Dzogchen teachings, we call it Rigpa. In the Bardo teachings, which are also Dzogchen teachings, we call it the child luminosity, the true nature of our mind, Rigpa. And the mother luminosity is Buddhahood, Buddha. So in that moment of dying, when everything is dissolved, Rigpa, the child luminosity, is there. And because we've done this practice, right, we immediately recognize that for what it is. Awareness is aware of itself. That seems like a paradox, but awareness is aware of itself. And then the Mother Luminosity dawns naturally, don't need to do anything. Mother Luminosity just dawns, or Samanta Badri is what we would call that Mother Luminosity if we were talking about like the Vajrayana tradition. She dawns, but not a being, not separate from us. It's a state of enlightened awareness, the absolute source, and because we have recognized the child luminosity while we were practicing, or Rigpa, then those two things, our awareness and our little child luminosity and the mother luminosities, they become one. These are just words to kind of try to describe something that's not describable. I think before I've sort of talked about the Rigpa, right, has a sense of location, of being somewhere. Time's gone, and the dualistic experience is gone. So self is gone. The self is gone. There's timeless awareness, right? Non-dual, timeless non-dual awareness, right? In that state of Rigpa. Then, but there's a sense of being somewhere, and that's because we're not Buddhas. We're not Buddhas, right? But in death, when everything dissolves, that child luminosity or that non-dual timeless awareness merges with Samantabhadri, Mother Luminosity, Buddha, right? And that is an inconceivable next step. But one sort of marker of that is that there's no location anymore either. So, we have this feeling of oneness with the universe when we're abiding in the natural state, but there's still a sense of a singular experience. I don't know how to describe it. It's not hard. It's not easy to describe. But then when you merge with that mother luminosity, there's that goes, and there's everythingness. There's no words for it. It can't be described. It can't be known. It cannot be known from here. Can't be. But when that happens, you're free of all future rebirth. You become one with all. And then, by virtue of our true nature, I do find it quite hard to talk about this because it's really, the words just are not sufficient, and also feel very I feel emotional when I talk about this because it's like a profound opportunity, and it's built in to our experience. It's not something we need to strive for, attain, chase in any way. In death, it's there naturally, but we do need to do this practice so that when that gift that's given to all sentient beings, just by virtue of their existence, when that arises, we can take the opportunity. It's so important. So that's why we do everything. Everything is about that moment so that we can be free of all future rebirth. But of course, in life, when you become realized, which means what? To recognize one's own nature and abide in that nature permanently, right? It doesn't mean just to have a glimpse or look. I mean, a cat can have a glimpse. My cats have a glimpse. I have glimpses. Every practitioner of any significant period of time has glimpses, right? It's not unique. The duration that it lasts is what makes the difference between a person who's realized and a person who is not. So a realized person abides permanently in that state, permanently. And what does that mean? They're liberated as well. So a realized being is also a liberated being. What does liberated mean? Liberated from the dualistic mind's pain and suffering, from dualistic emotions, from anger, jealousy, envy, attachment, all that poison. Liberated from that, right? Then, but enlightenment's a whole other game. That's a whole other game. you know, that is exceedingly rare. It's really exceedingly rare and precious. And for 99.9999999% of beings can only be found in the bardo. That's where it's found for most. The Buddha talked about, he gave a list of 7, these places where one can have these ways that one can be enlightened, and also times in terms of their practice. So it's not just one, there's 7, according to the Buddha. One of those is, and it's the most common, in the bardo, in between this life and the next, right? But intriguingly, it means that there doesn't need to be a next. Because in that moment, you have a choice. You can become one with all and remain, or, and this is what happens for most of us, this deep push towards rebirth for the sake of sentient beings arises. It's a profound, irresistible, overwhelming push. And so we're reborn in a situation in which we can help others. But that's only if we recognize that nature. If we don't recognize that nature, then our habitual mind, or karma, if you want to call it, I don't like the word karma because it has so many meanings, right? In the Hindu context, it means things. And a lot of Buddhists have adopted those Hindu meanings, but then it also has the Buddhist meanings, and then in Buddhist meanings, it has multiple meanings. There's the Sutra level meaning of karma. There's a Mahayana meaning of karma. There's a Vajrayana meaning of karma. There's a Dzogchen meaning of karma, right? They're all different, similar but different. They all, fundamentally cause and effect, but they operate on very different levels and ways. And then, it also kind of implies this quite implacable force, which in Dzogchen, even in the Sutra teachings, it's not. It's not an implacable force, and it's not deterministic. It's not deterministic in the sutra. It's not deterministic in Dzogchen. But in the middle there, you get this idea that it determines your existence because of the influence of Buddhism on Vajrayana. Anyway, so if we do these practices, if we choose the right one, and we have a foundation of shamatha, and also, a hard awareness of impermanence, emptiness, Buddha nature, and ethics, basic cause and effect, then shamatha, then vipassana arises naturally, then we can do these practices to assist us, then Dzogchen, So there's a progressive kind of a way through that, but there's also practices that will get you the whole way in and of themselves. So with these luminous heart essence practices, or this natural awakening practices, you choose the one you want to do. So you choose your sense and your element, and you sit until the point where you have glimpses of that oneness, right? Then the suggestion, which is just a suggestion, is you go to sky gazing. Because once you've had a glimpse of that oneness, to shift to sky gazing, which can be done at night, which is not called sky gazing. Interesting, it's called something else. When you shift to that, it leads to an opening up of that oneness experience, a more pervasive experience of that, which is very beneficial in the bardos, but also in this life. And then, but of course, when we're talking about that, we're really talking about trekchö now, right? And then if and only if you still need further input, you might adopt togyo as a practice, which looks on the outside very similar to sky gazing, right? But there's other things happening there. So that's really it. So the natural awakening practices are a condensed version of shamatha, because you adopt the pose, you place your awareness gently on the object. The object is one of the elements, natural elements. And then on top of that, it's part of this mindfulness process is awareness cultivation, because you're being aware, not focusing in a kind of like concentrated way on a single thing. You're being aware of the whole experience. So that's what makes it Vipassana. Vipassana leads to insight into the difference between the thing perceived, the perceptual experience, and one's awareness. It shows you the difference and also how they're one in some way. But it happens in a sort of a process. It's a natural thing. It's actually kind of almost like beautiful how that happens, because it happens that way because it has to, but also because it's a gift. You know, it's this insight is a gift leading to this next insight. That it's like really rather beautiful how it works. Anyway, so I invite you, choose your element, choose the sense you want to use as the grounding point, which is just where you start, and then you open up and be aware of all your experience. So you just start with like the sound or looking at something or feeling something or smelling something. You just start there, and then that is essentially what you use in shamatha to calm the mind. It's the object. It's what you use to calm the mind. Keep it sort of gently aware of something, an object, and then you can start to open up once you find that you can sit with that object without too much going on in the mind. So the mind's calm and you feel relaxed. And then you can open it up, and it actually just happens naturally. It opens up, and then the other senses, you can be aware of them going on at the same time, and the other elements, how they're all in interconnection and in play. So, and then when you get to the point where you start to have those oneness experiences, so, and this happens with shamatha, so it's not like an experience that's unique to this practice. It happens in devotion. It happens in true selfless love, compassion, or empathy, whatever you want to call it. So this oneness experience is normal, so it's not unique to this. But when that starts to happen as a result of this practice, you then, the advice is you move on. Well, you don't have to drop that practice at all. You can keep doing it, but then you would add sky gazing, and with sky gazing in the context of the Trekchö teachings, which it's a slightly different version of sky gazing. And then from there, the dissolution of the self and the foregrounding of the empty luminous nature of things, which happens naturally, that leads to Togyo visions naturally, right? So you can do this if there's joy, love, compassion, or evenness, one of those, or devotion. So this is natural. So if you have a foundation of like, the core things, impermanence. I'm always talking about these four seals of Dharma, which include impermanence, shunyata, the fact that all emotional states are inevitably poison, and the fact of your Buddha nature, which it's not called that when you look at the four seals. It's not called Buddha nature. It's basically liberation is real, nirvana is real. That is about your nature. The fact that it's possible is because of your nature. So if you've got a foundation of that, that's the only scholarly stuff you need. And I don't mean scholarly in the like, read about it. I mean, those ideas need to be clear in your intellectual mind, and then you need to have a heart awareness. And then shamatha, right? You sit in shamatha, fueled by either joy or devotion. And then naturally, if you start to sit outside, this process will emerge. But you can consciously choose, I'm going to do it. And then naturally you reach a point where the sky gazing becomes something you really, really want to do. You're drawn naturally to it. And then the realizations of Trekchö, right, which are mostly about the true nature of mind and emptiness, then the Togyo visions start to happen naturally because the sky gazing prompts them, right? But But you need that ground of shamatha and the foundation of impermanence, emptiness, Buddha nature. And then this all, it's all natural. I don't know how many times I can say that. So you don't need to actually pursue any of these parts. You just sit and do your thing. And if you have joy and devotion as your fundamental state, emotional state, it will happen this way naturally for you. There's no need to chase up empowerments or teachings, although in our 5-year program, we will have either NDR or Karma Rinpoche teach Trekchö and give the transmission for the sort of like Dudjom Trekchö texts. But you actually don't need to chase them if you practice in this way. It makes all of that unnecessary, which is why Garab Dorje said, don't visualize, don't seek empowerments, don't create mandalas, don't use mantras, don't attempt to purify anything, because it's not needed in this path. The practice, which, we give these different stages of it, different names, but it's the same thing. It's cultivation of awareness, laid on this foundation of calm and joy, and if you're lucky, devotion, and then it just proceeds. It just proceeds. It's a natural unfolding. Okay, we're down to our last few minutes. We'll do, Leonie is our timekeeper. So Leonie, can we do 10 minutes of questions and then you do the closing? Is that okay with you? Yep. So I'm going to keep the recording on for the questions in case they're interesting, if that's okay. So if you don't want to use your voice or image, you can put the questions in the chat. I realize I've given you a lot of information and it's a bit overwhelming. So you might not have questions now, but it's good to, voice your concerns, raise any questions you might have. There's a thing in the Dharma that is not foregrounded enough, and that is to be open about what we don't know is fundamental. It's really important to not. I mean, sometimes people don't ask questions because they don't want to take up time, but you deserve the time, so ask questions. And sometimes people don't ask questions because they don't want to reveal that they don't know. That's not healthy. It's good to reveal what you don't. There's so much that I don't know. It's good to reveal what you don't know. And sometimes people don't ask questions because they think that others will judge their question. But in my experience of this group, that's never going to happen here, ever. So, so just ask your questions. Peter, go ahead. Peter McCullough, go ahead. I think you're muted, Peter. Okay, so while Peter's working out her microphone, I'll answer the question in the chat from Leonie, which is, what is the definition of Trekchö? So remember, spelled Trekcho, Trekchö. Okay, so it's in the Dzogchen tradition. There's only 4 real practices, unless you count Rushin, which I'm not, and they are shamatha, vipassana, Trekchö, Togyo. Trekchö it's translated as cutting through. And what they mean is cutting through the illusion of samsara and cutting through the sense we have that the mind is real, permanent, lasting, and that we are that mind. So it's really, but what it is actually, and in some places, Trekchö is just sky gazing. with a view, a certain sort of a view. But in other traditions, it is just a kind of a querying of the mind, looking to the mind. What is its nature, etc. So all meditation practices have an object. Shamatha, the object is what? External, something external. You choose breath, stone, pebble, whatever. In Vipassana, the object is the state of perception and thinking and feeling itself. So the coming and goings of the mind, the elements, the thoughts and feelings and things, you're looking at them. You're being aware of how that all works. Then Maitreya, it moves on to the object is the mind itself. And when they say the mind itself, they mean awareness. So the object in Trekchö is awareness. So it's awareness on awareness itself, right? And then Togyo, the object is the profound, empty, luminous nature of all, using a certain, there's 3 postures in Togyo, and there's using one of those to kind of like prompt a direct experience of that illusory nature. So that's it. In a oh, Peter's saying she can't unmute. Well, just type your question in, Peter, and I'll read it out and then answer it. Any other questions while we're waiting on Peter? Nope. Okay. So I will make the recording available to people who are in our 5-year program. And if you email me, I'll put my email in the chat. If you're not in the 5-year program, that is, I'll also send you the link to where you can view it. Actually, I'll give you the Pristine Awareness email address just in case I don't have time to check it. Check my own personal one. Okay, there's my email address. Okay, Peter's saying, I find it difficult to drop the self. I feel like the process is dissolving of self into the one. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You don't need to do anything. So it's our natural state. Our natural state is free of the dualistic mind. So you don't have to do anything. We just sit. And the self eventually just dissolves into that state of unity. And then, so the reason why you might, so for example, in our 5-year program, we promote, we encourage everyone to do the joy practice for a year and really nothing else. People have other things they're doing, of course, but if you do the joy practice every day for at least a few minutes, for a year, you will definitely get to a place where the self dissolves into that state of unity. You will, if you do the joy practice, which is a combination of connecting with the natural state of joy and shamatha sitting. You will, if you do that every day for a year. Like we've checked this, it will happen. So we have a couple of guinea pigs, 2 in America and 1 in India, who did this, and it worked for them. And they were starting as absolute beginners. So but they were very determined. Like that's the thing. They were determined and they did it. So you have to be quite focused and do the joy practice every day for a year and it will happen. Likewise, in shamatha, if you have devotion, right? Shamatha every day for a year, it will happen probably quicker than a year for most people, actually, if you have devotion. So likewise, if you do one of these natural awakening practices, which is done like this, you choose your element. So let's say we're going to choose a mountain. Earth is our element. Or if we choose earth, we could sort of look at some hills or something. We sit, we place our gaze gently on the object. We let that object ground us in the way that our breath would normally do in shamatha, but we're really just doing a form of shamatha. We're just sitting. If thoughts come, we just go, okay, back to the hills. you know, back to the perceptual experience or the mountain, whatever we're looking at. And then in time, the mind calms, and then in a little more time, we become quite, because there's space in the mind now that we're calm, the different elements of the workings of the mind, so the perception of it and what arises as a result of the perception and the thing itself become clearly distinct. You know, they become quite clearly distinct. And then if we keep sitting in that practice, then once they become quite clearly distinct, they sort of start to merge back into awareness. And then there's just awareness, a non-dual state in which it's quite clear that not only what rises in the mind and what our perception is, but the objects themselves are unified in that awareness. You know, we're one. And by we, I don't mean like Pema and other people are one. Everything is one. And then if you continue to sit, right, the ability to be in that state of non-dual awareness in which time is not a factor anymore either, that elongates. And then we're guaranteed freedom if we can get to that place before we die. If we have, so this is the thing, if we have, say, 5 seconds of that experience in our practice, and then we get hit by a bus a week later or something, right? That is the period for which we will be able, that's the time that we will have to recognize the mother luminosity when it rises. 5 seconds. That's our capacity, right? And so what tukdam is, if those of you are not in Tibetan Buddhism, but tukdam is when a person dies, a lama, a teacher, a realized being dies, and their body doesn't rot, doesn't start to smell, doesn't start to decay, and there's warmth at the heart. Tukdam is a demonstration. They don't need to do it. So some lamas just die and they just die because that's what they want to do. But some lamas go into a state of tukdam as an inspiration to us to practice. They stay in that state for extended periods of time. How long do they stay in that state? For however long in their life they were able to abide in the natural state, right? Some of them do a shorter time frame because they want to get things moving. Don't want to take up all people's time. You know, so some, usually it's 3 days. Really high lamas sometimes I'll give them 3 days. That'll be enough. Then I'm moving on. You know, they don't want people tied up for days and days and days waiting for this to finish. You know, but some lamas want to make such a profound demonstration that they stay for a long time. And Namgay Dawa Rinpoche's guru, her name was Khandro Semo, well, I'm going to give it a full title, Dujom Khandro Semo Lanze Wangmo Rinpoche, if you want to add that on there. But Dujom and Khandro are both higher titles than Rinpoche. She chose to stay in Tukdam for 15 days. As far as I know, that's unheard of. In the West, she was in the West. So her body remained at the retreat center in northern upstate New York without refrigeration or any intervention for 15 days without decaying or going rigid or any sign of death, actually, no pallor or anything, and her heart warm for that entire time, 15 days, you know, and that was her way of going, this is totally real. You can abide in this state. It's not unattainable. It's not unachievable. This is real, you know. She also stayed in that state because it took about that long for everyone to gather from all over the world for her funeral. So it was also a practical thing, you know. So, you know, however long you can stay in that state in your meditation is how long you will have to merge with the mother luminosity at the time of dying. So you don't want it to be 5 seconds, do you? You want it to be longer, you know. Let's not be nuts though. We don't want it to be 15 days. You know, let's not aim that high. You know, half an hour to an hour. That's enough. That's enough. You will be free. if you can do that, you know. This is why like Jamyang has no fear. I mean, I have no fear of death either, but for different reasons. He has no hesitation about dying at all because he knows he'll be free. He's completely confident because of the teachings his Lama gave him, have equipped him. So he's also incredibly grateful to his Lama for having, you know, having that view. Death is not in any way scary to people who practice. And there's no like, um, everyone can do that. There's no special people. There's no special people. Everyone can do it. It's not, there's no, oh, that person like has great karma and they really have all the conditions in place and blah, blah, blah. Because let me tell you now, the lamas who really achieved the path had many obstacles and problems. You know, like for example, Durga Khyentse Rinpoche regularly dealt with stomach problems, stomach pain, multiple food poisoning, multiple stomach dramas. He had ongoing stomach dramas for his whole life. You know, Dudjom Rinpoche had really severe emphysema. He could barely breathe, but his awareness didn't care about that. And oftentimes, you know, doctors would say, "How can this person be alive? There's so little oxygen going in." You know, and other lamas, Nosho Ken Rinpoche, profoundly unwell all his life. You know, all his life he was unwell to the point where he couldn't speak, went into catatonic states, really unwell, became free, you know. And Jujom Kando Sembalanze Wangmo had cancer. Wasn't an obstacle to her, you know. I mean, come on. There's no special people. If you practice, you can be free. The Buddha made this very clear. There is no special people. Everyone's the same. Everyone has the same Buddha nature, and it is not your outer qualities or your temporary adventitious situation that makes or breaks you. Your Buddha nature is the same. That's all that matters. Let's wind it up. Leonie, do you want to do the closing prayer, please? I'll make it possible so that you can share. Uh, where is it? Oh, I'll stop the recording first, and then we'll do the closing prayer. Thanks everyone on the video.